In August 1931, Asta Eicher had been boasting to her friends and family in Park Ridge, Illinois for weeks about a wealthy civil engineer who had the potential to completely transform her life. Cornelius Pearson was a righteous man who, she believed, could take care of her and her family for the rest of their lives. He spoke eloquently, had a decent job, and seemed like the perfect match for a recent widower. The American Friendship Society facilitated their recent meeting. Asta would eventually leave with the stranger, leaving her 3 children, Greta, Harry, and Annabelle, in the care of a friend, Elizabeth Abernathy, while she was away. Not long after, Elizabeth received a letter stating that Cornelius would be back soon to whisk the kids away to live with their new family. Cornelius did, in fact, show up and took the children, but only after attempting to withdraw the last of Asta's funds from her savings account. The bank declined the transaction due to a forged signature, and before he could be questioned any further, Cornelius vanished, along with the entire Eicher family, leaving all of their belongings behind. Meanwhile, Cornelius Pearson was courting Dorothy Lemke in Northborough, Massachusetts. She too had met him through the American Friendship Society. Dorothy had quickly grown fond of the man who seemed to check every box. He boasted of his immense self-worth, his steady income, and even bragged about his 10-room house. These claims were similar to those made by Asta and her children. Eventually, Dorothy and Cornelius met, fell deeply in love, and fled to Iowa for their marriage. Cornelius then suggested that Dorothy withdraw the last of her money, for reasons that remain uncertain. But she trusted her new husband and complied. Dorothy's friends and family would never hear from her again once she spent the money. Who was Cornelius Pearson? Why were these women disappearing? Were there more victims? Despite the lack of answers to many questions, one crucial truth would eventually surface. Cornelius Pearson was actually career criminal Harry F. Powers. Harry Powers was born in November 1893 in a village in the Netherlands called Beerta. In 1910, his family sent him to the United States to find work, but Harry soon turned to petty crimes. He briefly worked on a farm but quit, complaining that the boss was too hard on him. From 1911 to 1924, Harry was arrested multiple times for stealing liquor, stealing a car, escaping from prison, and finally for breaking into a home and attempting to burn it down. After serving over a year in prison for that last crime, he decided to change his tactics and commit crimes that would be more difficult to trace back to him. In 1922, he began corresponding with multiple widows in an attempt to steal their money. Because many of the victims were ashamed of being deceived, and Harry used several aliases, it's still unclear how many women fell for his trap. But in 1924, one woman certainly did. Posing as Joseph Gildow, Harry went on to marry a widow named Alla Province. Not long after, he slipped an unknown substance into her drink and vanished with some of her most prized possessions. Despite Alla Province reporting Joseph to the police, he had already vanished. Harry continued moving from town to town, conning unsuspecting women out of their affection and their savings, until, in 1926, he landed in the small town of Quiet Dell, West Virginia. There, he met a woman who would become his wife, and perhaps even an accomplice in his evil schemes, Luella Strother, a local grocery store owner. Over the coming years, Harry would frequently leave home under the guise of a traveling salesman, but much of his time was spent working on lonely women. He crafted an elaborate template for the perfect letter to send to those seeking companionship. It's suspected that Harry sent out hundreds of these nearly identical letters. Through his travels and numerous attempts at seduction, he eventually crossed paths with both Asta Eicher and Dorothy Lemke. Both women disappeared around the same time, shortly after their rendezvous with the man calling himself Cornelius Pearson. The first to raise suspicion was the sudden disappearance of Asta and her children. The forged signature on her bank account and Cornelius's flimsy excuse, claiming the family had gone on a trip to Europe, left locals uneasy. They posed questions, prompting the launch of an investigation into the mysterious man. All they had to go on was a name and a town: Quiet Dell. Investigators first reached out to local officials, but no one had ever heard of Cornelius Pearson. Their next lead came from the postmaster, who confirmed that a man by that name had rented a P.O. box. The address associated with it led them to the home of a couple, Harry Powers and Luella Strother. At this point, the investigators clearly suspected foul play. Though no one was home, police made the decision to search the property. Breaking into the garage, they discovered a disturbing scene. A pile of clothing in different sizes, several bloodstains, strands of hair, scattered jewelry. and a trapdoor. Police chose to wait for Powers to return and offer an explanation. When they finally spotted him, they swiftly apprehended him and guided him through the property. Investigators discovered dozens of letters during the search, all ready for potential new victims. While scouring the area for further evidence, authorities received a tip from a local boy. He suggested they check a drainage ditch accessible from the garage. The unmistakable odor of decay hit them as soon as they did. They knew instantly what Powers had done to the innocent family. They brought in prisoners from the local penitentiary to excavate the area. What they uncovered was horrific. The bodies of Asta, Greta, Harry, and Annabelle, all bound tightly with rope and stuffed into burlap sacks. The nooses had hung the women, and a hammer had bludgeoned little Harry. A few days later, they discovered Dorothy Lemke's body, similarly bound with a belt around her neck. They took Powers downtown for interrogation. Given the brutality of his crimes, it seemed almost inevitable that he would confess. In his words, he described how he murdered the family. I was permitting little Harry Eicher to watch the killing of his mother and the others. But in the middle of it, he let out an awful scream. I was afraid the neighbors would hear it, so I picked up a hammer and let him have it. He went on to say that Dorothy arrived the day after he killed the Eicher family. Powers tortured her for hours until she agreed to sign several checks. Then, he blindfolded her and strangled her as well. After the arrest, the story became national news. Numerous women came forward, asserting that they had narrowly avoided becoming the next victim of Harry Powers. Investigators were unsure how involved Luella, Harry's wife, had been, but she soon showed a chilling lack of remorse. She leased the property to transform it into a public attraction, advertising it as "Pay to see the murder site of the infamous Bluebeard of Quiet Dell." The morbid exhibit didn't last long. Locals, infuriated, eventually set fire to the house. Due to growing public interest, and because the local courthouse was under construction, it was decided that Harry Powers' trial would be moved to a more dramatic venue, the Clarksburg Opera House. The setting only added to the media frenzy surrounding the case. During the trial, doctors testified that Powers was a psychopath, but one who clearly understood the difference between right and wrong. After both sides presented their arguments, the jury was sent to deliberate. Not in a jury room, but beneath the stage itself. It took them just 2 hours to return with a verdict: guilty. On December 12, 1932, Harry Powers was sentenced to death. He was transferred to a death row cell at the West Virginia State Penitentiary, where he awaited execution. On March 18, 1932, he was marched up the gallows steps. They placed a hood over his head. They wrapped a thick rope around his neck. They then hanged Powers until he died, just as he had done to so many of his victims. While he sat behind bars, rumors swirled about how many other victims he may have claimed, how many widows had fallen for his charms. Some speculated that Powers could have killed as many as 50 people, based on a chilling comment he made to reporters. When asked about other potential charges, Powers replied, "I'm already good for 5. Why try to get me on 50? Whether that was bravado or a glimpse of the truth, no one could say for sure. The disappearance of Dudley C. Wade, a former business associate and fellow traveling salesman, was one case that strongly implicated Powers. Wade's inventory of vacuum cleaners was found in Powers' possession, but Harry talked his way out of suspicion, claiming Dudley had stolen them and he had simply planned to return the items. No formal investigation was ever pursued. Harry Powers' legacy would take on a new life years later, inspiring one of the most sinister villains in film history, Reverend Harry Powell in The Night of the Hunter. In both the book and the 1955 movie, a smooth-talking con man seduces a widow and terrorizes her children, trying to uncover the hidden fortune left by their late father. The story echoes Powers' own tactics and leaves a chilling reminder of the real-life horror behind the fiction.